Hello people. Before I begin, I want to say, as I do every video, that this video is partly guided by the principle of free will, which basically states everybody has their own discernment, everybody is created as a unique being who vibrates with who is inclined to their own specific way of viewing the world. And so I'm not saying this as to override anyone else's judgment. I'm simply talking some ideas. These are hypotheses. So this is in relation to the human design chart and the law of one, two sources I often try and bring together in my videos. And here are the charts of Carla Rueckert on the right and Don Elkins on the left. The thing is about these individuals in particular is that since they were doing the law of one of them was a questioner, one of them was a channel, they were working with very high vibrational entities that were guiding them, pushing them forward in a sense. So they were becoming their true selves in a sense. And even though they didn't have any idea about the human design, they reflected certain things in the human design in their verbal accounts of their lives. So one thing Carla said is that she had two sides of her, the animal side and the spiritual side, and she felt that she'd overdone the spiritual side and not done the animal side. I mean, this is what she thought. The channel didn't agree. And here we can see that she has the spiritual side and the animal side separate here, or she could have in her perception. I want to focus on something that happened, and this is recorded in session 106. And the description of the session before that. So it's not just on Law of One info in the session itself, but if you read the books, which is how I originally got this information, you will see their physical description of what happened that led in this direction. So what happened was Don was he was decreasing in health. He wasn't doing too well at the end of the Law of One. None of them were doing well, to be honest. But Don particularly had this sudden absolute decline in health. And he said to the channel, "What's wrong with me? How do I fix this?" And the channel said to him that because he'd had a discussion with Carla and they'd made a verbal agreement, it had reversed the energies of both of them. And they'd basically become screwed up, both of them. So the thing that happened to Carla is she went into an unbelievable amount of paranoia, like, as she described it, a feral animal. And it wasn't quite clear what happened to Don, but I can imagine having Carla's energy inside him would be very confusing if you were not equipped with that much emotional circuitry. So we can infer from that then that Don's energy field, as was described in the session and was described by the individual, Don's energy field is filled with a great deal more toughness than Carla. In session 106.22, the contact explained that the questioner had what might be called an armour, that the wearing of the armour that they had kind of given up and given to the channel, who then couldn't handle that because it wasn't her energy field. And another part of the question in session 106 was that the questioner had allowed a complete transfer of mental and emotional pain to the channel. This is an area of, to me, I think, unbelievable interest and unbelievable mystery, and that is interesting. It makes you realize that when the higher forces are working with us, you know, when a thing happens here or there, or a societal thing changes, that these are the types of incredibly subtle energies that they are having to deal with. Imagine amongst the people that aren't as high vibration as Carla and Don, and that these agreements can happen without them having any idea of them. So something like this happens and it just carries on for about 5 years. This kind of thing is one of the energies that might have gone wrong in, say, an abusive or traumatic situation. And if it was to suddenly get fixed, what would that look like? But I mean, it just brings up 100 questions to me, 100 things of interest. Like, for instance, if we were to look at Don's chart, we can see there is a certain amount of toughness there. We have the 3828, we have a defined will center. He was obviously designed to be able to handle pain within inside himself and to not have that be a problem, like not have that be something that even a highly refined negative entity can get at, you know? And is these features in his chart enough to create this armor? Or is it that there's other parts of himself which make it possible for him to have this effect? I think it's very interesting. You could add this into other discussions on densities. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what density each one of these individuals was from and the individual characteristics that they manifested in relation to their density. And I've had a lot of, I think, insights into this. I mean, it might not even be the willpower itself that does the thing. It might be that he was emotionally defined. I think emotionally defined people are inclined to holding a large amount of pain because I think the emotional system creates the pain. You know, what I've noticed with emotionally defined people is that they really want things. They really want things. And as someone with the emotion open, so I don't have a single hexagram on that chart, I really feel quite desireless a lot of the time. I really feel quite mechanical in the way I am. Anyway, there was another video I was going to do, which I probably will still do, which focuses on Carla's G self going to the throat here and a few other people's G self going to the throat, to say how strongly this seems to be about values and such like that, and that perhaps the G self is very much about conscience, values, principles, and to align the G self correctly, we need to have a good idea of these G self values and we need to be aligned with them. A lot of Carla's channeling was about these issues, but I find with the 731 specifically, there's a lack of specificity with it. It's general principles, but it's not articulated principles. Another point that I think is interesting maybe about Carla, or maybe not, is that in some of Carla's channeling, she rather resents a lot of normal everyday stuff. Now, I'm not sure if normal everyday stuff is something that's only generators have to deal with, but I have noticed in my life that generators in particular are those that tend to be really working, really working. And they tend to have this viewpoint that this has been unfairly placed upon them, I think, where it seems to me that the sacred itself would compel that. So there would be something in their kind of spirits that would be pushing that. In the human design, it's said that manifestors and projectors aren't meant to be working quite as much. They're not meant to be doing that 9 to 5. And the generators kind of are. There was another part of the Law of One which stated that Carla had gone to a new house, and because Don was a bit overprotective, he'd stopped her, or I can't remember if he'd wanted to stop her or he had stopped her, but there had been the option of stopping her actually doing any work around the house, and that this was completely against her energy field. So even if Carla does kind of resent everyday work, it's clearly in her chart here. And this is things like tidying. And what do we know about everyday work and the projector or the manifestor? Well, we don't know anything really. Like, I've personally, as a manifestor, done a fair amount of gardening work, a fair amount of hard physical gardening work, and I have felt that's very much in line with me. But even so, I think it's an interesting question. To what extent are generators really meant to be doing that kind of work which they might consciously resent? And one final point, I'm going to bring in a quote. I really wanted to send this to someone, actually. when a mutual friend had suddenly passed and it was unexpected, and I didn't at the time. And I kind of have a suspicion that due to social politics, this person is very much on the other end of a social disagreement I now have with them, so I'm not going to send them this. But there was a little poetry piece by a person called Aeschylitus, I think. I'll put it up here. He who learns must suffer, and even in our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, and in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God. That, on its own, I think, is an absolutely lovely sentiment, but it brings up something else that I want to talk about. I'm trying to get more into poetry, actually. But when it says, by the awful grace of God, I sort of feel that, and I don't feel it like an energy coming in and changing my direction and life path, which I always imagined was a thing from spiritual reading when I was young. I feel it like a thing like I'm charged with energy, but for some reason the things that I feel I should say, the way I feel I should express myself doesn't happen, but it does happen through another sort of subconscious way. And I've been trying to get to this. I've been trying to get to this point through other videos that I've planned. In my own chart here, I very often am feeling that things are coming up through the 2145 and maybe the 1156, which is a different message than I would choose if there was a channel going from the G self through to the throat. I.e., I don't talk about these sorts of values. I have another message in a sense, but with the 5125 here, it is all going on there. It's just not able to be expressed, and it's a very strange feeling, you know. But going back to the sacral of Kala and just people's general outlook, it is strange that our energy fields sort of compel us in certain directions, and we're just stuck with that. And it's very, very good, but it's not entirely comfortable. Not to what we would imagine, I don't think. That sort of arrogant, idealistic imagination that we all have, where we think we can kind of order God around. Anyway, that's that. I really liked this specific message. I like what I've said here, and because it is so open-ended, it has literally brought in more questions than it answers, and I think that's a very good way to have a message. And thank you for listening.